whether man-made or not, one of the worst disasters in human history. And we are genuinely less prepared for the next one than the last one.
It's not one of the worst disasters in human history. I could name 100 worse ones.
Fair enough, okay. But it was bad. I didn't enjoy it.
Let's not be purple.
It was
In front of an audience in real time, Bill Maher brought in woke ideologue Ezra Klein and completely destroyed him. Maher eventually had enough of Ezra's normal woke talking points, shutting him down and revealing some much-needed truth. It's been amazing to see Maher grow, expose woke crap, and restore common sense to his podcast and show. The fact that he is not only enlightening his guests, but also awakening his audience, the same people who supported him when he was spreading the same ideas in 2020-2023, makes it even better. Now let's watch the video where Maher destroys Ezra Klein in real time.
The Ezra Klein Show podcast and the co-author of the book Abundance, Ezra Klein, and he writes the weekly Dish newsletter and hosts the podcast The Dishcast with Andrew Sullivan. Andrew Sullivan. Okay, here are the questions. Andrew, what do you think of news that British intelligence knew COVID was a lab leak in 2020 and officially ignored their report?
Not just knew, aided a 95% certainty. Same with the German intelligence service. March 2020. There's a new book out called COVID's Wake. I was reading it this last couple of weeks, and the core paper that killed off any idea that this was a lab leak in China, the proximal origin paper, which was produced with Fauci and Collins of the NIH and NIAID helping it along, was a lie, a conscious lie. That the people who looked at it, we now have their emails, are saying in the very first days of looking at the virus, this looks very man-made to us. This is so friggin' obvious this is man-made. Well, so friggin' obvious, one of them said. And then they wrote the report saying there is no evidence that this was made in a lab. The question is why? Why would they lie to us about that? And they did.
Well, I can give you one answer, the New York Times. The New York Times said any questioning of this being from a lab was racist, which always struck me as odd because it seems much more racist to go, wow, these people are eating bats.
I know.
I mean, it's just one example, but a good example of why people lost faith in the left, because they do stupid things like that. Not to be an I told you so, but from the very beginning, I was saying this shouldn't even be political, but it's at least a 50-50 came from the lab, and that in 50 years, I can't imagine people going, wait, you mean in 2020, there was this thing that escaped from a lab in Wuhan, that started in Wuhan, and there was a lab in Wuhan that was studying it? And they didn't think that was connected? And they blamed it on bats? Really? It just doesn't make any sense.
It makes a little bit more sense.
You can gaslight people so easily.
Yes. Even if you said exactly what Bill Maher says today, half of the nation would have called you a conspiracy theorist or a nut job back then. That's the terrifying thing. And to be honest, 15-20% of people would still consider you crazy if you said that now. The majority of individuals at the time flatly disputed what is today considered to be true. Although many people have subtly changed their minds, many people still refuse to accept any viewpoint that deviates from their narrative, or even acknowledge that it originated in a lab. The overwhelming denial of fact, not the discussion itself, is what is so frightening. There are thousands of people trapped in their echo chambers, unable to see what is directly in front of them. For every Bill Maher who is prepared to reconsider and acknowledge the reality, the true black pill is that.
Democrats as much as for the scientists who went along with this, knowing better. It's their integrity I'm concerned about, to actually lie and distort what they could see with their own eyes because they were afraid of politics. The other question is this. This lab was a gain of function. That means they were creating viruses,
right,
dangerous viruses, to figure out how to protect you from them. This gain of function was research was always dangerous. Everyone knew it was dangerous. A long time ago, you go back to 2015, you will find a big meeting in London where they say there's one lab in the world most likely to have a problem with this, Wuhan. Do you know who was the biggest supporter of gain-of-function research for the last 30 years? Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci. Yeah. Now, remember that name. There's a reason he was given a pardon back to 2014. There is something very wrong going on here.
You know?
Yeah, I also don't think he did it for nefarious reasons. There's an argument to be made. There's an actual intellectual debate to be had. Should gain-of-function research be done? We want to get ahead of viruses. The other answer is, the other response would be, it's too dangerous. Because if it gets out, it's going to be bad. And that's what happened. But I don't think he's an evil guy,
No, I think
like some people do, who was trying to get rich off this.
No.
Okay, he just made the wrong call.
No, he knew from the get-go that the Wuhan lab had security levels that were the average of a dentist's office. They should have been at the highest level imaginable. He knew that. Not only that,
he made the wrong call.
NIH and NID had helped fund it.
That isn't exactly a bad decision. We're being incredibly incompetent if we're being as charitable as we possibly can. That isn't exactly a bad decision. Saying, I weighed the options, it was 50-50, and I just had to go with my gut, and it was wrong, is not the same as that. It didn't happen like that. As they say here, the security measures at that lab were in the dirt, in the ground, and maximum security, maximum cleanliness, and maximum making sure that this virus doesn't get out should have been the goal. When they're doing this gain-of-function research, you know? And it's okay if Fauci says, oh, that's not a poor decision. Extreme incompetence is what that is. Personally, I kind of thought it was worse than incompetence, but you have to judge if we're being as charitable as we can be.
So you don't want to go down in history as the person who helped develop the virus that killed millions of people. You want to go down as the one who saved millions of people. That was at stake, a reputational matter.
A piece of a lot of this that seems insane to me is we are now years after, whether man-made or not, one of the worst disasters in human history. And we are genuinely less prepared for the next one than the last one.
It's not one of the worst disasters in human history. I could name 100 worse ones.
Fair enough,
Okay.
but it was bad. I didn't enjoy it.
Let's not be purple.
It was a
about
bad pandemic. Let's put it
A
that way.
lot worse.
The response to that is going to be the awful portion, the part that will be remembered poorly throughout human history, not the object itself. The answer is going to be that. The lockdowns will be the main event. That will be the portion that goes down in human history as one of the worst things that has ever occurred. It will be the force mandate, similar to the jab mandates, not the object itself. In that sense, he needs to correct that particular aspect.
Genuinely not my point on this. I'm happy to see.
right.
I'm happy to see that the Holocaust is worse than the pandemic.
Okay.
Like, it's fine. But in other things, other countries, in this country, right? After something terrible happens, you often have these big bipartisan commissions that come up with a bunch of recommendations and try to create preparedness for next time. I sort of agree with you that we've gone way too far on airport security for too long, but we did a lot on things like biosecurity that made sense and actually did make us safer.
Yeah.
And we have anti-learned lessons, right? On the one hand, we had
Do you believe that airport security has overreached itself? Not in my opinion. These days, with all the killings and crazy things that go on, I completely distrust crowds. I want to know that no one else is able to carry a firearm if I am in a crowded area. Anywhere there is a crowd, like movie theaters or airports, I support metal detectors. I have nothing to conceal, so why oppose it if you don't? Some people are actually out here wiping their bottoms on Teslas, man. People are unpredictable. Give me the highest level of protection. Peace of mind is what I seek.
speed, and now you got RFK Jr. running HHS. On the other hand, a bunch of huge mistakes are made on things like lockdowns, and we're just arguing about them. We haven't put out, say, a new best practices, right? Gain of function research, which y'all were just talking about, it is just an argument. It's something I try to keep paying attention to, and they haven't come out with strong new guidelines. Bird flu, everybody I read who knows what they're talking about says we are in a terrible position on bird flu if it actually begins to mutate and make the jump. We just have never figured out a way to find a policy equilibrium here, as opposed to sort of keep rehabbing the argument. The arguments are important.
Because everything gets politicized.
But everything gets
That's
politicized. We don't have the capacity to come to agreements. It's really bad that we're this unprepared now.
But that's why the integrity of science
I
is
agree.
so important.
I agree with you on
If
this.
we don't trust the scientists, who on earth are we going to trust? And
Because of the lockdowns and how badly they were handled, as well as the fact that any reputable scientist who challenged the story was silenced, I have entirely lost faith in big pharma and mainstream research. For voicing valid concerns, those with actual credentials were excluded, ostracized, and banished from the discussion. Real science doesn't operate like that. If your argument is sound, you can disprove others without having to suppress them. It was obvious from the censorship that they had something to conceal. At this point, I don't believe a word the government or its experts say, which is dangerous for any nation. In any case, what do you guys think of Ezra Klein, the woke clown, being shut down by Bill Maher for making absurd assertions regarding 2020? Please share your opinions in the comments section below.